Grace and peace. I'm Brian Most of the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives and the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world. We are continuing our series on the meaning of creation, a look at Genesis 1 through 11, featuring and specifically interested in where does humanity belong. So not just the how of creation, but the why of creation, and answering the deep questions that the story of creation causes us to ask. This is the second lesson of 10, and in this lesson we're going to concentrate on who God is, or who is God, according to Genesis chapter 1 through 11, but specifically this week we're just going to be looking at the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, that first verse and the chapter 1 and 2 and just the depiction of creation that Moses writes down in that chapter is somewhat genius for the time. It is very, very different than what was going on, what was thought, what the ancient Near East believed and taught about God in those areas that taught about creation. There was some moving forward, some almost prophetic movement forward with how the Hebrew Bible depicts the creation in comparison to other religions of the time. So just looking at this Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a fascinating verse. And as the Hebrew Old Testament starts with that verse, it smacks of difference from the other creation myths going around in those days. And to highlight that, I'm going to read an extended portion of what's called the Inu Elish. It's an ancient Babylonian creation myth. And just to hear what it's going, this is somewhat edited. There's a lot more to it. This is tablet 1, and you can see the verses are numbered there. So these are the verses I took from tablet 1 just to kind of describe how the Babylonians at the time of Moses, in and around this era of the ancient Hebrews, in this area, what did the Babylonians believe about creation, and how did they describe it? There was Apsu, the first in order, their begetter, and demiurge Tiamat, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together. The gods were created within them. Ansar and Kesar, who excelled them, were created. Anu, their son, could rival his fathers. Anu, the son, equaled Ansar. And Anu begat Nedimud, his own equal. Nedimud, Ea, is also called Ea, was the champion among his fathers. Their clamor got loud, throwing Tiamat into a turmoil. Apsu opened his mouth and addressed Tiamat. Their behavior has become displeasing to me, and I can't rest in the daytime or sleep at night. I will destroy and break up their way of life, that silence may reign and we may sleep. When Tiamat heard this, she raged and cried out to her spouse. She cried in distress, fuming within herself. She grieved over the plotted evil. How can we destroy what we have given birth to? Though their behavior causes distress, let us tighten discipline graciously. He, Ea, or Nimedud, put Apsu to slumber as he poured out sleep. He split Apsu's sinews, ripped off his crown, carried away his aura, and put it on himself. He bound Apsu and killed him. He set his dwelling upon Apsu. Then Ea had bound and slain his enemies. In Apsu was Marduk born. In pure Apsu was Marduk born. Ea, his father, begat him. Damkina, his mother, bore him. So, in that Babylonian account, we hear of multiple gods that are warring with each other, fathers wanting to kill their children, children actually killing their fathers, and then just Marduk, who becomes the Babylonian god, and the police being born out of the body of dead deities. There's violence, there's anger, there's strife, there's the an unbalance of power. Sometimes the sons will overweigh the original creative gods. There's a bunch of strife, and in this first tablet, humanity doesn't even appear, or the earth and creation comes very much later in this. This is very different than what chapter 1 of Genesis describes. Now, some people can find some connections to it, some influence of it, but quite often what is found is almost described as a parody or a reference or even a repudiation of what we see in these other creation myths. Just so you can understand, it's not just the Babylonians. Here's some references, and this is taken from a website, list25.com, and you can find more creation myths there. But these are some of the ones that would be at least somewhat local enough to the ancient Near East that Moses and the ancient Hebrews may have run into them in some way. Heliopolis, which is coming from ancient Egypt, like only chaotic water existed, which they called none. The sun god appeared from a lotus flower and gave light to the universe. The Ra created Shu, the air god, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Those two gave birth to the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb. From them, the physical universe was formed. So a little less violent, but there is this piece where, there's multiple gods. Sometimes the sons outshine the patriarchs or the beginning gods, and then also just there's always something that's existing, this chaotic water, things like that these gods arise out of. The gods very seldom are pre-existent. Again, this is Proto-Indo-European creation story, so we find something similar to this throughout Europe, throughout the Indian subcontinent, throughout and everything in between. In this myth, a primordial being is sacrificed, killed, and dismembered. Its body parts are used to create the universe. This being's name is different in all societies. For instance, in Old Norse myth, the Old Norse myth, this being is called Ymir. So this idea that the earth was created out of the body of a dead god is a very, very common theme throughout the creation myths. Hindu creation stories. So although there may have been some transfer of ideas from the Indian subcontinent to the ancient Near East. So this is possible, something that not familiar, not indigenous to the ancient Near East, but something they may have run across from. In the Rig Veda, it tells of Purusha, a being who had 1,000 heads, eyes, and feet. It could clutch the earth with its feet. The gods, however, sacrificed Purusha and made it into butter that became all the animals, elements, and 3 gods, Agni, Yayu, and Indra. So again, God dying, and out of that God's body comes the physical creation and other gods as well. So Pelasian, which is just ancient Greece before the ancient Greeks. In this myth, Eurynomé was the goddess of all things and the only one in the beginning. She rose out of the chaos naked and divided the sea from the sky and danced on its waves. She caught hold of the north wind, rubbed it between her hands, and created the serpent Ophion. When Eurynomé danced, Ophion grew lustful, coiled up her limbs, and coupled with her. She became with child and birthed the sun, moon, stars, and the earth and its mountains and rivers. They made their home on Mount Olympus, but when Ophion taunted her by saying he created the universe, she bruised his head with her heel and kicked him down to the lower places of the earth. So again, some pieces to this that kind of sounds familiar, but there's this snake and goddess that actually copulate to produce the earth, and also disagreement between the original goddess, God, and the snake thing going on there. So just showing a little bit of a difference in here. Sumerian creation myth, and this is the last one we'll go over. For the ancient Sumerians, in the beginning there was only the goddess Namu. She gave birth to the universe, Anki, who gave birth to the air god Enlil. Enlil split the universe in two, making An the sky god and Ki the goddess of the earth. Eventually, many gods came into existence, and they were made to do hard labor until they rebelled. Enlil came up with a plan to create lesser beings, humanity, to serve the gods. They elected just Tue, who had great intelligence, to be sacrificed. Nimrod, the birth goddess, mixed his flesh and blood, and all the gods spat on it. His body was made into clay, which eventually made 7 men and 7 women. So the death of gods is something that is clear. Multiple gods, polytheism is cleared. The universe being made out of the body of the dead gods. In this one, we see humanity being made as servants, slaves to the gods. So this is kind of just a sampling of what the cultures around the ancient Hebrews beliefs. Sumerian, Babylonian, Egyptian, the ancient Greeks, and just some other pieces there. We see this, not necessarily similar beliefs, but a baseline there that in the beginning God created the heavens and earth is distinct. And there are some things that seem somewhat familiar with that. And we wonder if Moses wrote those familiar things in to grab people's attention, to expand on the differences that are going to be, to highlight the differences. Moses' description of creation is distinct from the other creation stories that were circulating in the ancient Near East at the same time. And it looks like now evangelical Christians like I am would say God revealed this to him. But just looking at it, even without the supernatural piece to this, Moses' description of the creation is a step forward in religious genius. It is moving forward in a way of understanding the world that was more profound than the other descriptions. The case in point, these other religious descriptions are no longer still relevant, yet we're here talking about Genesis 1 in a way that it still can make sense to us. And I would probably argue that 3,500 years ago Moses wrote this, it still makes sense to us today. And I would say 3,500 years from now, another 4,000 years from now, whenever we have this conversation again, Moses' description of the creation might even will make more sense than our current modern worldview description of the creation as well. I believe that it is written in such a profound way that it has meaning throughout the millennia. I mean, think about that. Writing something that has meaning throughout millennia is what Moses did, and it was a profound movement forward for religious thought in his day. Now, some questions to think about. What are some differences between the Genesis creation account and others? Just sit down and see if you can find some of those. How would you explain the differences between the Genesis and other creation accounts? How would believing the other creation myth change one's worldview? If you think humanity was created to be the slaves of gods, if you think the universe was born out of violent fighting between gods or the death of a god, how does that change your worldview? How does that change your everyday life? Sometimes we're too familiar with the Genesis creation myth that we don't realize how our worldview is completely wrapped up in what that story seems to be true. So I've enjoyed having this conversation with you. There are 3 ways to do it: in person Sunday nights at 5, and the JEMIC live Monday nights 7 p.m. via Zoom, and these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. As always, I'm all over social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Like, subscribe, follow where appropriate. I enjoyed having this conversation. Hope it continues real soon.